So I am joined today on the podcast by Jane Levin. Welcome.
Thank you.
Really excited about this episode. And funnily enough, I was just thinking this morning that this episode came about off the back of a LinkedIn post
Yeah, that's
about
right.
about part-time work. So we're going to be talking today about flexibility, freelance, and forging your own path. All really interesting and very topical. But Jane, do you want to start maybe by giving us a bit of an introduction to yourself and a bit of an overview of your career to date?
Yeah, sure. I suppose in a nutshell, I'm a content specialist, writer, editor, producer. Um, but way back at the start of my career, I did a law arts degree and I went and did my articles with Dalby and O'Brien. And I soon discovered, probably after a couple of years, that the legal profession was not for me. So I was fortunate enough to find a job at La Trobe University, a newly created role where they wanted someone from a legal background to basically build relationships with law firms and other employers to promote the school, to help students develop skills and become more confident in getting a job. And because it was a newly created role, it was an opportunity for me to develop a new set of skills in communications, in marketing, in a whole range of things, public displays and events. So that was a really exciting role. Then I actually moved to the Department of Education and did some internal comms. So obviously in a government environment, it was really interesting. And then at that point, I decided to run my own business. I thought I'm going to become a freelancer. I want to do writing, editing. I want to be involved in that kind of thing. And I went back to uni and did a grad dip at Swinburne in applied media, so web production, journalism, which was great. And then I set about trying to find clients. And I was also lucky enough to, during my studies, I was given an internship at the ABC at Radio National, producing websites for audio programming, which was really exciting. I was also invited back to La Trobe to do a website restructure and some more comms. Then I had baby number one and was able to continue a bit of freelance to keep my hand in. Then I had another baby eventually. But in the meantime, I'd done a lot of work with agencies. I really tried to vary what I was doing at that point. So a lot of branding, marketing, PR agencies, a lot of my own clients, and I kept going with that. And then I was lucky enough to get a role with Australia Post. And that was, again, another sort of first in that it was what is now, I suppose, My Post. It's that personal app that you can use to interact with Australia Post. So it was the development of that. And so I did all of the content for that. So across the app, web, FAQs, marketing. It was a really exciting environment. It was my first time working in an agile environment. So I developed even more skills. And then I think that really would have helped me cement my most recent role, which was working for 9 years at Australia Post in philatelic, so stamps and collectibles. And that was a fantastic role as a researcher, a writer, so basically project managing and producing all the content for stamps, collectibles, and all the other books and blogs and other exciting items that go along with that.
And the Holy Grail there, because that one was
Yeah,
permanent part-time.
yeah. So that was 2 days permanent part time. And then I managed to build that up to 4 days a week, because I got involved in also the promotion side. So social, DMs, blogs, media, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that was a great opportunity. And I only very recently have left there to, I suppose, pursue my next challenge. And as we've discussed, I'm pretty obsessed with all things podcast in my personal life. So
Aren't we all?
aren't we all? Yeah. So I'm doing a podcast production course in the hope that, you know, I can then take that to the next level in my next opportunity. That was probably a very long nutshell.
No, that's great, because there's so much in there in terms of the freelance, the part-time, the permanent part-time, getting a part-time role, and then managing to expand in the number of days. You know, and I jokingly said that's the Holy Grail, but it really is. Like, there's so many, and as I said at the beginning, that's how this conversation kind of came about, that I'm talking to so many people who are really wanting to find part-time, but that isn't necessarily reflected in what the market's offering. There's a bit of a disconnect there. So yeah, really interested to kind of dig in and find out really how you made that work, and how you were able to forge that path. But I want to go back, because it's such an interesting starting point of thinking that you wanted to go into the law, and actually, you know, doing a law degree and spending your first few years in the legal environment, and then realizing that that's maybe not where you wanted to be. How did that all come about? Talk me through that.
Oh, look, I think it probably came about for a few reasons. I mean, the first is probably what we all do, and that is we assume we know what we want, and we assume we know what something is, based on perception, because, you know, we're young. So, I mean, I come from a family on both sides of way too many lawyers to be normal. So that probably influenced my decision. But I thought it was all about you know, justice and arguing for what's right and changing the world. And I soon realised, no, that's actually not what it's about. It was probably what my arts degree was about, but not the law. But I figured I would continue with it because it's a great degree to have. And so I continued with it. And then, even though I knew, I think, pretty much that it still wasn't going to be for me, I wanted to give it a go. I figured I'd got that far, I may as well do the training. But after giving it a bit of a go, I thought, it's probably not for me. So I either had to make a decision to maybe ask one of the partners if I could move into something like crime, which I figured I would probably have more of a personal connection to. But I just made the decision of, no, I think I've known all along that something with, you know, more on that communication side of things, it really cemented for me that I think I want to give that a go. And I realized that if I'd stayed for too long, I'd be making it harder for myself to move into something else. So I just bit the bullet.
Oh, yeah, because I think that's the thing, isn't it, that there's this perception that we're somehow meant to know, you know. It's a long time ago now, but I'm trying to think how old I was when, you know, you have to start first making those decisions, and it's what, 14, 15, probably 16.
Yeah,
how are you really meant to know? I mean, you have not much of a sense of really who you are, let alone what you want to do for the rest of your life, and yet you're magically meant to know the answer to these questions.
Absolutely right. I think you're right. I mean, I was 17 when I finished year 12, and I actually even took the year off to go and work, which I really enjoyed. But I think you're right. I mean, you are so young. Of course, you don't think you're young, but
We know
you are.
everything.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can only work with what you know at the time. And yeah, so I agree with you. I think there's a lot of pressure in deciding what do I want to do and what do I want to be, rather than what am I passionate about, what am I interested in, and where is that going to lead me? What opportunity do I want to take?
When you made that decision originally to go into the law, did you have a sense of that more sort of creative side, that comms side, that communication side? Was it a choice, or you hadn't kind of got to that point yet?
I don't think I'd really got to that point, although in some ways I had, but perhaps not consciously, in that
Mm.
at school, yeah, I was really into debating. I,
Which
you
you
know,
would
I just,
assume, I can see how you're thinking, oh, the law, because that's how
yeah,
that's how it looks on TV, right?
correct.
Yeah,
Oh, absolutely. And I think I spent most of my year 12 watching LA Law
me
instead
too.
of
It's funny when
studying.
you,
But yeah, and I actually wrote an article very early on when I was before I was editor of the Young Lawyers Journal, but before that I was writing articles. And one of them that I wrote was about that very fact of how bad are some of these TV shows of communicating what it's like to be a lawyer, let alone a young lawyer. Like it's so far removed from the truth. It's yeah, it's quite amusing.
a little bit more
Yeah, so
glamorous perhaps on the television.
yeah, that's right. So I think if I had have perhaps taken a different approach, if I had have actually looked at what do I love doing, I probably would have gone for a course like journalism, for example. But I probably didn't have the confidence. I probably thought, oh, it's an interview, and I don't know how I would go, and it's that usual thing where you're young, you don't have a lot of confidence, perhaps, and so I just went with what I thought was, yeah, this is the path I should be on. And I think it happens to a lot of students if you're
Mm.
somewhat capable academically. It seems like the logical thing to do. Whereas in contrast, I had a really good friend who is incredibly talented, far more intelligent than me. And she could have done law a million times over, but she decided to do an arts degree with languages and all these interesting things. And she's gone on and had an incredible career in sort of TV journalism and all of that. And I remember really respecting her at the time that she didn't give in to that expectation of, well, maybe you should do law because you've got the marks for it.
Mm.
So I think she was quite perceptive early on.
Yeah,
Um,
there's
mm,
some quite narrow definitions, aren't there, around, I think, how we're taught, how we're socialized, maybe even to think about our careers and our choices in terms of education and degrees. There isn't, you said something the other day when we were chatting about, because it's so hard to know in terms of a career or a degree, but if you can distill it down to what are the things that I enjoy, what are the things that I'm good at, and try and look at the tasks themselves as opposed to what the overarching title of those tasks would be. And I think that can be quite useful. It also probably takes a little bit of the pressure off of that, having to know. I
oh,
this
absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, I can even see it with my own children. I've got a nearly 15-year-old daughter, and already people are saying, oh, what does she think she's going to do? And I always say, well, hopefully something she's passionate about. And
Mm.
wherever that leads her, fantastic. So
Yeah.
it starts really early, that idea that you must know your path and it must be very linear and definite and result in a definite job at the end. And I just have never found that mentality useful. And I wish that there'd be a bit of a shift maybe at that school
Mm.
stage, so that perhaps young adults felt like they could explore a little bit more and just follow their passions, see where it leads. Because I couldn't have told you that being a researcher and content specialist at Australia Post in stamps, I couldn't have
Yeah.
even foreseen that was a
No.
thing. And yet it was absolutely a dream job and a fantastic role, but no one grows up thinking they're going to be that. And it's not something you can go into. You know, we, three of us who did that role, figured out that we were all 41 when we first started. And I think there's a reason, because you have to have some career behind you.
Yeah. The other thing that just came to mind as you were saying that, in terms of the research part, I would imagine that is something that you did take from the law, the ability to research, to understand, to distill information, and then present it in a perhaps more simplified way.
Absolutely. And I think that's also what helped me when I started my freelance writing business, was that you're often having to convince people, I've only got this much experience, but I can do this. And I think my law degree probably helped me along the way, because, you know, it probably shows that I've got some level of discipline, at some level of intelligence. And you're absolutely right. The number of transferable skills from that, I think that ability to look at a large complex problem or scenario or information, and to spot the relevant issue relatively quickly, and then distill things down, like you say. I absolutely think that's a vital skill in what I do, let alone the technical research side of things. Yeah, for sure.
Talk me through the decision, the freelance decision. Brave on the face of it. Like, how did you get to that, come to that decision?
Yeah, look, I think what it was is that, because I'd come off this contract role with the Department of Education in internal comms, you know, and a very steep learning curve, really valuable. But I said to myself, either I can continue to take on one role after another, you know, and I didn't really want to be churning through jobs to get the experience I needed to get. And I thought, that's not going to be fast enough, and it's not going to give me this broad range of skills, and it's not going to give me the flexibility to take on a variety of projects, get those skills, and to also experience a range of sectors. So I was really about, I need to get a lot of experience as quickly as I can and take all of these opportunities. So freelance seemed like the logical step. And I was also in a position where I could do it, because I, you know, didn't have a mortgage, didn't have children. So I could take that financial risk. And I was just lucky, I think, because I think if you're going to do something like that, I personally wouldn't recommend doing it, say, straight out of uni, because I think it's much harder to sell yourself. I think if you've had a bit of experience, you can then say, right, well, I've worked in these sectors, so I could approach those sectors for freelance work, while then continuing to build skills. So, so I don't think it was all that risky, in that I wasn't sacrificing so much. I saw it very much as strategic. And because I'm someone who I like having lots of different things going on at once. I like new challenges. So it ticked that box as well, that every day is different, and I can experience a lot in a shorter space of time.
It's interesting, isn't it? We're talking about flexibility by one definition, but you've used it there in another context, in the sense that the point that you were in your life, essentially, you had the flexibility to be able to do something more flexible, if that makes sense, as opposed to having some, you know, parameters, what feel like maybe boundaries where you maybe can't do that. The other thing that comes through really strongly there, listening to you talk about that, is the strategy and this kind of strategic approach. Is that something, being blunt, that you retrofitted in hindsight, or did you really feel like that at the time? Did you really kind of approach it from that, well, this is where I am, this is where I'm trying to get to, what are the steps that are going to help me get there?
Yeah, I don't think it's a retrofitted. I do think it was a definite strategy, but I made sure that I wasn't too definite in where I wanted to get to, I think that can be problematic, in that I think
Mm.
it's more about, these are the skills that I'm trying to get. This is sort of vaguely where I'd like to end up, but I don't know it all yet because I'm starting out. And so it gave me the opportunity to explore a range of things, which then I think probably informed where I kept heading towards and which opportunities I took. Because I think through this whole path, one thing I have realized in hindsight is that there have been eternal crossroads where I could have gone one way or the other. And so I think if you're too fixed in your mindset that this is exactly 100% where I want to be, you might miss some opportunities along the way, or you might kind of dismiss them, and just because you're so fixated about a particular path. But it was definitely deliberate, in the sense of trying to get that experience and learn more, get more skills, and progress.
Mm. How do you go about it? Because I think it's kind of one of those things that on the face of it, you know, sounds quite simple. Oh, I decided to go freelance, you know,
Yeah.
great. But we both know it's not that simple. And
No.
the one thing you need to be able to do that is some clients who are presumably happy to pay you some money for your skills.
Yeah.
How did you go about it? How did you get those clients? How did you get work?
Well, look, I mean, and maybe because, this was quite a while ago now, so as to whether it would fall into place now, I couldn't say. But I think I was, again, quite strategic about it. So I said to myself, okay, I've worked at La Trobe, I've worked in government. So I started to target sort of educational institutions. I was quite, and then I thought about my own network. And so I literally was quite old fashioned about it, in that I wrote to people, and I suppose tried to sell myself, and I showed some of my samples. And so I was just lucky in that sense. But I think another thing that I've always tried to do that I think is valuable is that a lot of my opportunities have come because once I was somewhere, I really worked hard and I really tried to make a good impression. And that then led to people asking me back. So I went back to La Trobe because they asked me to come back. I went back to the ABC after my internship to do the features website work because they asked me to come back. I was able to go from my, this is jumping out of freelance, but able to go from my 2 days a week in Australia Post to 4 days, because I think you've got to, as well as being strategic, you've got to be very genuine in your interactions with people, because you're creating an impression, you're building relationships, and I think building those relationships means you can then call upon those people and try and get some recommendations for clients. And pretty much my entire client base during freelance was pretty much word of mouth and referrals. After that initial work to get the clients, I was fairly lucky in a sense. But that requires work, and it requires relationship building, and perhaps a level of confidence beyond your ability at the time. You do have to do a little bit of that. Of comes back to, I suppose, the idea of transferable skills, that you do have to sell your ability to do something, even if you literally haven't done it. If you've done something related, or if you can get in front of someone and have a meeting with them, sometimes I think that can make any deficiencies on paper dissipate a little bit. I think I'm probably far better in person than I am on paper. So I think you've got to have a bit of confidence, and you have to be able to build relationships.
I many moons ago, when I first arrived in Australia, 11 and a half years ago, worked doing freelance recruitment and working only with freelancers. And something I used to say all the time that being a good freelancer is in itself a skill, regardless of
Oh,
the skill that you, whether it's as a designer or a content person, comms, whatever it is. Being a good freelancer will get you further than the actual skill. Are you personable? Are you reliable? Are you flexible? Are you know, all of those things that freelance is I guess kind of known for. If you can kind of embody those things, then you're going to get more work. And obviously
yeah.
you need to have the skills, you need to be able to deliver. But if you're difficult to work with, unreliable, you know, hard going, just a difficult person generally, people are not going to want to, I mean, that's true in all things, but
Yeah.
I think it's more, even more so in freelance. I think that in itself is a skill.
100%. I totally agree with you, because I think people sometimes have a misconception that, oh, freelance, it's so much fun and you're just working for yourself, and you can just get up and work at whatever time, and it's so not the reality, because you have to work incredibly hard, because you're not just doing the work, you're then having to see, well, where's my next work, and what am I going to do at the times when I don't have as much work. So I totally agree with you. I think it then means that if you do want to do what I did and then transfer out of it and into a permanent role, there's so many skills that you have for exactly the reason you said, that you are absolutely flexible, you are reliable, you are organized, you are highly productive, because you
Mm.
can't charge yourself out at an hourly rate or a daily rate and then just sit there and take your time. I mean, you have to be providing value for money at every opportunity. And I totally agree. And you also have to be able to not overpromise. If you have lots of opportunities coming your way, the temptation is, I'll just take them all. But then, of course, something's going to give, and you're not going to, give to that client. And you also have to be flexible in how you do freelance. In that, I found that initially I thought it would be me working from home, remotely, sending off assignments to people, and that was that. And I soon realized that no, for some people, say at the agency side, they wanted me to come in and, from the client's perspective, look like part of the team, even though I technically wasn't. So that involved getting to know the agency's business, getting to know their clients, getting to know their values and how they work, so that when I come to client meetings, I look like part of the team. But then I might have to switch to a totally different environment, totally different style guide. So you really have to, it's not just sort of about you and how you work. You have to be able to adapt to how others work to be able to take on those opportunities, particularly if you also do a bit of in-house, short-term projects like I did.
And the Holy Grail, as I called it, I wonder how many times I can say that during the course of our conversation. Your first permanent part-time role. Tell me how that came about.
So you mean in terms of after freelance, like with
Yeah,
Australia
yeah.
Post? Yeah, so that was interesting. I think so. The digital mailbox project that I did with Australia Post, that was a contract, and they'd actually asked me to stay on, and I made the decision that's not really where I wanted to be. And even though I didn't know exactly where I wanted to be, I always feel like I don't think you should make decisions out of fear, or sort of that desperate feeling of, maybe I won't find what I want, so I better do this. So I said no to that, and then it just happened to be that a few months later, this position at Australia Post in Philatelic was advertised, but it was actually advertised through an agent, and so the ad was very cryptic, and it didn't actually tell you who you would be working for and exactly what you would be doing. But I read it, and my grandmother was actually a philatelist, and she actually wrote a lot about stamps. She was a journalist. Very amazing woman. But I read it a few times, and I thought, I think this is stamps. And I rang up the recruiter, and she said, "You're the first person to guess it." So, yeah, so I thought this sounds amazing because it was 2 days a week part-time. And at that point, that's what I wanted. I thought I could continue to do freelance and then do
Mm,
this as well. What an amazing opportunity. Um, and I was really lucky, I think, because I don't think I was necessarily 100% what they might have expected. But then I think they realized maybe after interviewing other applicants that, um, maybe they would give me a go. And again, I think it was a case of just being lucky enough to get the interview and being able to sell myself a little bit. Um, but yeah, that was just an incredible opportunity because it's the content itself is so valuable. I was really struck by the fact that these are really important things. So not only are there still a lot of collectors who really value stamps and they go into the National Archives. They're beautiful little pockets of our history, our heritage, our everything really.
mm.
It was just amazing, and I learned a lot from the colleagues that I worked with as well. So yeah, that was uh, just a great opportunity, and I've learned a lot in that role as well. So
You
yeah.
touched on it before, and it perhaps comes into this as well, as you were saying. Maybe you weren't necessarily what they were expecting to get transferable skills. And I think if we're talking, broadly about flexibility and freelance, and to be fair, I actually just think work in general, but how important, and perhaps even your transfer originally from the law to comms,
Mm,
how important transferable skills are, and
yeah.
the difference that actually they've made in your career. And perhaps as you look back, sometimes it was actually those skills that got you the job, not necessarily the actual skills required for the job, if that makes sense.
Yes. Oh, look, I 100% agree. I really feel that, and this could be a self-serving statement, but I really feel that people need to perhaps grasp this a bit more about themselves. That often we have the attitude of, oh, well, they're asking for X, Y, Z, and I haven't worked in that exact environment, so I probably shouldn't go for it because blah, blah, blah. And I guess I've just never held that view. And I really feel strongly that it is about skills because, I mean, you know, unless it's a very particular job, but in the sphere that I'm in, it really is about skills, 100%. And I sometimes think, well, good on the employers who recognise that because what you're getting is maybe it's a good thing within a team to have a mixture of that people who have come through the business and have only worked in that sector and have all that institutional knowledge. But when you bring someone else in with these transferable skills, they're coming in with a totally fresh approach. They might bring something to your team that you haven't had before. And often what they're lacking, as long as what they're lacking is something that can be picked up quite quickly. And so I think it has made all the difference for me. Because even within comms and within content and writing and all of it, um, you have a particular set of skills, but then you might want to transfer it somewhere different. And so I really think a skills-based approach on both sides of the fence. So people when they're selling themselves,
Mm.
but also employers maybe when they're considering who will I employ, that maybe they get a pretty strong field of applicants if
Yeah,
they had that flexibility as well.
there's that word again. I It's something that I feel really strongly about, actually, and something that I said before, I've been here nearly 12 years, that I observe in the Australian market that I didn't find to be the case in London. That I think, to their detriment, businesses can be a little bit rigid in terms of how they think about a particular role, to talk about it in a very simplistic sense, you know, they perhaps have distilled that role down to 10 things and 10 little check boxes, and they want someone to have done all 10 of those things. I think there's a number of issues with that. The one that immediately kind of springs to mind is, where's the challenge? Where's the growth? You know, if that person has done all of those 10 things in 6 months' time, once they've understood the business, what are they doing? Like, it's boring. Who wants to do that? That's the first thing. But also, I just think it's such a narrow, rigid way to approach it. You know, if I hire the exact person that's just left this role, then I'll get a successful outcome. I think it feels maybe like a bit of risk aversion over the years. That's the closest reason that I can kind of get to. But I just think it's such a missed opportunity to think of it that way. And I, as much as possible with my own clients, really advocate for transferable skills and for taking a more broad approach. And, you know, obviously, if it's a marketing role, the person needs to be a marketer. I'm not suggesting that we go, you know, totally off to another planet, but do they need to have worked in the exact same industry? I don't think so. Do they, you know, it depends how granular you want to get. But again, I think if it's and this perhaps also comes into what we're going to talk around productivity, but if we can stop talking perhaps about the parameters of the role and actually start to think about what you need this person to deliver for the business, and let's think about how we get to that, then all those transferable skills suddenly become so important. And I think also, to your point, fresh ideas, new viewpoints, different ways of doing things, I think all of those things are so important. And I think if we're just stuck in this little rigid, you know, 10 tick boxes, I don't think it's helpful to anyone, you know, the applicants, the business, the market more generally. I just think it's a very unproductive, personally, way to go about it. And soapbox topic, as you can tell.
No, I totally agree with you. And I think it's a good point though about, you know, risk taking and things like that, because I think at either end of the spectrum, whether you're hiring someone maybe who's at a more junior level, where are you going to expect that they've already done, like sometimes you sort of think, what are you expecting from this person when it's a junior role? But I think even at the senior level that, and again, I think I'm probably being self-serving, but, you know, if someone has proven themselves time and time again with these transferable skills, but they want to shift slightly, like I'm perhaps doing, I want to add other media to my, you know, suite of media. Well, surely that shows that they are really passionate about this, and they might have other ways of showing, you know, experience rather than I have been exactly that. So I 100% agree, and I think having that attitude, you know, throughout your career. So I think what I touched on before about having, sometimes we don't realize at the time that opportunities are in front of us, and there were several points in my career where I was at that crossroads, and even going back to university where, you know, I was at a crossroads where I was invited to do honours in politics, and I chose to go and do my articles instead. Or even at, you know, if you're offered to continue in a role and then you choose to go somewhere else, you know, or I could have stayed in the law, but I chose to go somewhere else. And I think if you don't have that mentality of taking sensible risks, or being, I suppose, not motivated by this is what I should do, and this is how it's always been, and this is the most linear path. I think that's across the board with your career, because I think you miss out on too much. And to me, it's all about, is this a good opportunity? Am I passionate about it? Am I going to learn something? Because I still want to continue to learn. I don't want to just stay still, and that's why I've left the dream job, because I feel like I need to learn more. And continue to take some
Mm.
calculated risks, I guess.
Yeah. You said should. I hate that word. I just think it's so many poor decisions, I think, can be made off the back of should. And I think, you know, in career, but you know, life in general, of I should do this or I should do that. I just think, yeah, it's not a metric that I prefer to use.
Yep.
Going back to your earlier point as well about transferable skills, and I think how we look at experience more broadly. I think having experience of having gone into new roles, new freelance assignments, and having to learn on the job, take on new skills, you've got that to fall back on. You know, when someone says, oh, well, you know, these are the 10 things that we said we wanted, I can only see 6 here, how are you going to make that work? Well, here's the 20 years of experience of where I've made that work. So do you think I can probably do that again? I think I probably can. Yeah.
Well, that's right. And I think it's the all those years of varied experiences, because I think it helps you then if you do need to fill in a bit of skills gap, you know, and show that you can do it. The more varied experiences you've had across the board, the more chance you have of being able to fill those gaps. And I mean, I even remember when I started at Australia Post, and you know, the research side of things, I think, you know, I was really strong in, and but there were other aspects where I thought, oh, I've got to learn a bit more about this, like just the pure, I suppose, process of it all, and the end to end, and the you know, a lot of really complex copyright clearances, or just things that you wouldn't imagine when you look at a stamp, like the amount of research that goes into it. Because as anyone who works in content and comms, or particularly content, you know, you, even if you only need a small amount of information, that doesn't mean you do a small amount of research. Then you don't know what you don't know. So you still have to do this amount of research, because you might end up with a stamp, but then you also end up with an 1,000-word essay in a book or something like that. But I think, you know, you learn a lot on the job, and I think if you come in with a, I suppose, a curious mindset, that willingness to say, it doesn't matter that I've had a lot of experience, haven't had experience in this, I'm going to learn from those around me, I'm going to hit the ground running, but I'm going to be backed up by all these other skills. So I'll have the confidence to do that. I think it's just maybe having confidence in people that once they've proven themselves time and time again in a particular environment, doing enough of what you want, give them the opportunity to prove themselves, because they're going to be more. I think I was more driven too, because I felt like I've got all of this experience, but I'm a bit lacking here. So I was really driven, because I didn't want people to think, why did they bring her in?
Yeah, if you want to prove yourself.
What's she adding? You know, so you're more likely to feel the need to prove yourself, rather than, I've done this a million times.
Yeah, I agree.
Listen and learn, people.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
I've never walked into a role with that attitude.
Productivity. I could go on forever on what we've been saying, so I'm gonna go on a different direction, because otherwise I think we could be hours on this topic. Productivity, and I think particularly when we're thinking about part-time, I think the productivity to me is the crux of that conversation, and it's the bit that comes up from both sides, those pro and those against. And even in the LinkedIn post, the productivity thing came up time and time again, with some, to my mind, very backward examples. I didn't understand where some of they were almost arguing against themselves with the productivity side of things. From your perspective, tell me how it's worked for you. Tell me how you've used, I guess, productivity to your advantage.
Yeah, look, I totally agree with you. I think you know that I'm definitely on the side of flexibility in employment, and the there's so much value that a part-timer can bring. And I think it really is the fact that, again, it's that sense of, unfortunately, there can be this mindset of, oh, they're part-time, so it's going to be harder because they're not going to be here all the time. And how do we know they're going to get all the work done? But you are so keen to prove yourself that I found that working part-time and then having other part-timers around me, I feel we're far more productive than a full-timer. And I mean that in the sense that if you're full-time and you know you have 5 days to do something, your natural tendency is to lose a little bit of that urgency. Whereas when you're a part-timer, you know that you have to get done what you need to get done in that time, or people will start to, ask questions. So I feel that whether I was 2 days a week or whether eventually 4 days a week, I was always doing more. Like we always do more.
Yeah.
But I think I was more productive because I just did not have the time to, just say, oh, I'll leave that to Thursday.
Yeah. Oh,
You know,
I'll take it easy this afternoon. I've got tomorrow, whatever.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm not saying it's conscious. I'm not trying, because I've been a full-timer too. So I'm not trying to say that full-timers are sitting around going, oh, this is all a bit of fun. That's not true. Everyone's working really hard. But I do think there is this added mentality with someone who is part-time, particularly if they're working within a culture that doesn't embrace part-time. Then there's this sort of, I suppose, mistrust or, things better not fall apart.
Yeah.
So I found that often that mentality doesn't bear out. And I think the flexibility you can get from being part-time, and I think there's an assumption too that being part-time must always be because you've got kids. Now, in my case, that wasn't a factor in that my husband has done the kid wrangling. So it wasn't an issue for me. I wasn't part-time because I was saying I have to get off and pick up the kids. For me, it was a conscious thing, either because I was trying to balance it with freelance work or just because I decided that 4 days a week was really a good balance. And I felt I'm going to bring more to an organisation if I'm doing 4 days, not 5. And I feel that I've proven myself because, for 9 years, that's how I did it. And then before that, that's how I did it with freelance. So I never let anybody down, whether I was, whatever permanent role I was in and the freelance. But I felt just gave me that balance and that flexibility. And I think, otherwise it really is true that we've all got a lot that we're trying to balance in our lives. So let's just be realistic about that and say if someone is feeling like their life is in a bit more control and they're therefore very motivated when they come to work, I just think that's a good thing. And it even goes to the flexibility that comes from if you're working remotely and on site. I think you and I have discussed that. I mean, I don't subscribe to the view that you can just demand, I'm just going to work, this is how it's going to be. But I think that there is value in allowing that flexibility where it suits the business and the particular role. Because I'm so, especially if you work in comms, if you work in content, if anyone knows, especially if you're doing concentrated research or writing, that you need peace and quiet. So I found that if I could go into the office a day a week and get that interaction, have meetings, all of that kind of stuff, I was so much more productive the rest of the time at home. And this myth that you can just, again, it's like freelancing. You can't just sit there and do nothing because if you're not delivering, it's going to fall apart.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I think, for the most part, not only do you deliver, you then become a bit more innovative in how you might work. At Post, we changed our process entirely for the better because of the pandemic, because it forced us to reconsider stuff that we were doing because we'd always done it that way.
Yeah.
So we actually became more efficient by default, in a sense. So yeah, I could talk about it.
There's a theory. I should have Googled it before we started because I can't remember the name of it, but there is a proven theory about work expanding to fill time. It's true. You know, if you tell someone they've got 5 days to do something, then they will take 5 days. The work will expand. Whereas if you tell them they've got 4, they'll do it in 4. That's a really great, well expanded on theory from me. But Google it. It is a thing. I think the other thing that kind of fits into that as well is around, and I guess it goes to what we were saying, or what I was saying before about how to think of work more generally. If we use the definition of results and deliverables, and that's our measuring stick, not time, then the whole thing's irrelevant. You know, did I deliver good quality work? Did I deliver the result that you needed in the time allotted? Yes. End of conversation, you know.
Yeah, and that's right. And that's what I think as well, that, you know, it comes down again to really working hard and really proving your worth and your value at every opportunity. I mean, I happen to be someone who works quite quickly. I've just built that up over years and be able to deliver. And so I think I was able to prove that value because I think the organization realized that, wow, if we give her these 2 days doing the promotional side of things, they knew that if they had to replace what I was doing with someone new from the outside who wasn't familiar with the business, maybe didn't have my pace, that it would cost them a lot more because they wouldn't have been able to get it done in 2 days. So that's partly how you do it. So I think, but I also think conversely, I think it's dangerous to assume that because someone's part-time, that they kind of owe you blood, as in it's not fair to sort of basically turn a full-time, you know, say, well, just keep chucking work and say, well, you just have to keep proving yourself. It still has to be reasonable. But I'm willing to bet that because as well, if you're not someone who is working hard and adding value, that's the case whether you're full-time or part-time. It's really not the full-time, part-time thing is, that's not the barometer in that situation.
I speak to a lot of people, marketers, who are on 4 days a week, who are getting a fifth less salary because they're on 4 days a week, who are delivering a full day of, you know, a full-time equivalent, and they know they are, but there's that sort of that sense of, and this is often the wording that's used, I'm so lucky I finally got a 4-day-a-week job that I know kind of ripping me off really, but I'll take it because I'm just so desperate to find 4 days a week, and now I've got it. And that I would imagine happens a lot. And I'm not suggesting that, you know, all organizations are trying to rip the person off. I'm sure they're not. I'm sure it's not a conscious thing. They're just, you know, keep piling work on them, and as you said, the part-timer keeps taking it because they don't want to say no, because they don't want to be in a situation where they might lose the thing that they really value. But there's got to be a better way than that, and it does feel that a shift towards delivery and results is, rather than time bum on seat, is kind of how you get there. I always had this argument previously when I worked for someone else, and you know, it was 5 days a week in the office from 8:30 till 5:30, and I, like you, in the sense that I always felt that I worked quickly and I was very efficient and I could do a lot in the same amount of time as you know, someone might take longer. And I was like, well, I'm sitting here for the same amount of time, I'm actually delivering more. Would it really make any difference if, you know, my bum wasn't on this seat? I've got a mobile phone. I imagine, you know, I've got email on my phone. I'm still contactable. And it's just a funny definition, I think. And if there is one positive thing that came out of COVID and lockdowns, I think the conversation around how we work and productivity is definitely part of that. I'm not sure, just my own opinion, I don't think we've got there. I don't think we found the solution. I actually think that the pendulum's probably swung too far the other way, and we've just lost some balance of it needs to work for the individual. It also needs to work for the business. That, you know, there needs to be, like all things, there needs to be give and take. And if
Yes.
one side feels like they're being backed into a corner for whatever reason, it's probably not going to work.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, you know, when I do read about companies that are trialing the whole, well, all right, we'll pay you for full time, but you can work 4 days. I was always fearful that was going to happen when I worked 4 days, because I thought, well,
Yeah.
damn, because I'll be get paid less and do the same amount
Yeah.
of work. But I think you're right. I think danger, and as someone who loves the flexibility and would, you know, probably hesitate if I had to take on a role that was all in the office. I think there's sort of two dangers, and one is that I think you're right. There comes this mentality: I'm just going to demand it. You know, like there's sort of this.
Yeah.
People have forgotten that it's like, well, you're still being offered a job and can't really
Still
demand
paying
it.
you, so
It's not a human right. But
yeah.
I do think as well, I think back to perhaps people who are younger and who are starting off in their career, that really, you know, you do need that time in workplaces, because you need to learn from people who are more experienced than you. You need to build a lot of those skills about how to literally interact with people in a professional environment. And you're not going to get that from an exclusively remote role. So I would like to think that if I was, you know, way back at the start of my career, that I would want to be in the office
Yeah.
part of the time, because I think it's important. And even now, you know, I enjoyed at Australia Post. I had 1 day a week in the office, and I really did enjoy that day, and I did get something out of it. And that whole thing about, you know, team bonding, I just don't think it's necessary if it's all about just checking up on people and how
Yeah.
productive they're being. I don't subscribe to that, but I do think there's value in it, and I do think that it's something that, you know, you have to be able to prove that you can do. And I think it's some automatic demand that people should be making.
Yeah, I actually think personally, I think that is one of the biggest issues with it, that I think people underestimate how much they learn just from listening and observing their colleagues.
Yeah,
You know, I think back, whatever it was, 25 years ago nearly, to my first job, and how much I learnt just from listening and watching. What's that person saying? How are they approaching that conversation? Well, that was a really interesting phrase that they used on the phone. I wouldn't have thought to say that. I'm going to try that. And you're just constantly taking in all this information. Some of it's job specific, and like you said, some of it is just what's appropriate behavior in the office and how to talk to people in a professional environment. And I think maybe it's a case of you don't know what you don't know, and if you haven't had that, maybe you don't appreciate how much you're actually missing by not having it.
yeah, absolutely. And I think if you are someone who, like me, is this whole want to try new opportunities, even though, you know, you're progressing in terms of seniority, you have to be able to still learn from people and still absorb that new information to fill in those skills gaps, etc. So yeah, I totally agree. It's that don't know what you don't know. But then I guess that's about what are you bringing to this role? Are you going to continue to be curious in one way or another? Are you going to continue to value, you know, building those relationships? And to me, I think you should. If you're still in the workforce, you've still got to have those things going on. It just might be to, you know, a slightly smaller extent than if you're just starting out.
Yeah. To summarize, Jane, before we get to our final question, there's a couple of things that I think stand out for me from what you've said and my observations in terms of how you've been able to kind of make it work. Tell me if you think I've got it right. One of them is definitely the strategic element, that you had a plan had a plan, had an end goal, and had, as you said, sort of a rough idea of how you wanted to get there without being too rigid.
Yep.
And I think off the back of that, the other thing that's super important personally, and something that I think a lot of people miss, is that you took control of your career. You took control of what you wanted to happen, how you were going to get there. You weren't waiting for someone else to come and discover how amazing you were and give you these opportunities. You went out, found them, and made it happen for yourself. And I think that is so key. And it is one of the mistakes that I do see people making, is that they don't, no one's going to care about your career as much as you. So
No.
go and make it happen.
It's 100% true. And I think, I couldn't agree with that more, because I think if you do just take a passive attitude and you think to yourself, I'll just work really hard and I'll wait till this opportunity just pops up and I'll go for that opportunity. It's really, in my experience, has not been how it's happened. You have to, at every opportunity, be really conscious about what skills am I trying to develop and what would I like to have happen, and find ways to make people aware. Because often people might not be aware. They're not going to be aware that if you're working 2 days, you actually would be open to working 4 days. They're not going to be aware that because you develop certain skills in your role, that you'd like to also develop something else. So you have to be, without sounding like a permanent salesperson, you have to be doing those things, and you have to be networking, and you have to be, I've had situations where I've just approached people cold calling just to have coffee with them, because I thought, you're doing this thing that I think I would really quite like to do, and I need to learn more about it, and I need to know, how did you get there? And I'm even in that phase now, as I mentioned, where I'm like, okay, I've got these significant skills as a producer in that sort of print and digital, and I now want to explore audio a bit more. And it's like, well, no one is going to just tap me on the shoulder and say, we've seen this amazing work you've done at Australia Post, come join us. It's not going to happen.
Be
that
nice,
way.
wouldn't it?
So I've had to be strategic and say, right, I'm making new connections. I'm doing a course. I'm doing all sorts of other things. I have literally sat down and thought about all these transferable skills. And you have to keep doing that, and you have to be persistent, and you have to be patient. And like I said, you have to be flexible, because what you think you might be looking for, just keep your ears open, because something else might pop up. And I think it also comes down to decision making, that if you are at that crossroad where you think, oh, I could go in this direction or that direction, you need to be guided by the right things, in a sense of like what we spoke to before, like not, well, this is what I should do. You just got to be a bit more creative in your thinking, I think.
Yeah. The other thing that stands out, which true of career, but personally I think true of life as well, and a bit of a mantra of designing what you wanted rather than doing what you thought you should do, or what you thought it should look like, that you forged your own path, and design something that suited you and made it work for you. And I think that's, to me, the underlying point. And as I said, I think is certainly true of career, but I think true of life as well. And we shouldn't be stuck with should, in terms of it should look like this, it should look like that. Well, what do you want? What works for you? Make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And even though sometimes we perhaps do what we should do, as long as it's for a practical reason, that it's because, even though that thing in itself might not be so exciting, but I know that it's going to lead me to where I do want to go. So sometimes we have to do little things like that. But yeah, I totally agree. I just think, and I guess sometimes it does take a little bit of confidence, because I think and I've been guilty of this, and I still am guilty of this, that I think we have to try and let go of the imposter syndrome, because I think that can really hold you back. And I don't mean having false confidence. I don't mean trying to promote yourself as being able to do something that you literally can't do. But I think too many times we do look at a list and we say, oh, I don't have all 15 of those things.
Yeah.
There must be a better candidate out there. They are going to have all those things plus X, Y, Z. I shouldn't even bother. And I think, you know, it does take, just got to try and build that self-esteem to the point where, you know, you don't want overconfidence, you know, but I think just building it, it comes from a place of just really trying to have some confidence and being able to take, you know, take the hits when it doesn't happen the first time, because it doesn't. I mean, you know, you don't get everything that you want all the time. Just have to, I suppose, maintain some resilience and, you know, some confidence. Yes.
Yeah. Final question, Jane. Always the final question here on the podcast. You're smiling because you know what's coming. I forewarned you on this one. What do you know now that you wish you knew then?
Yes. Now, this question, it's such a good question, and it really stumped me when you first mentioned that you would be asking about it. And to be honest, I don't think I would want to know then what I know now. And I say that because I think we can all look back in hindsight, and I've done this a million times, of, if I had have known that, I wouldn't have done this, I wouldn't have done that, and I might have gone in this direction. But to me, I'm glad that I didn't know, because I think it gave me a sense of curiosity. I just made the decision in the moment, and that's how I've ended up here. That's how I ended up, you know, with a good set of skills and having experienced, you know, a couple of really dream roles, and I've been able to understand now that, you know, sort of public storytelling, like that's my thing, and the research and production. And, you know, if I had have known everything back then, maybe I wouldn't have gone on any kind of adventure. I would have just said, I know it all. I'll just do this and I'll just stick with that. So I don't think there's actually anything that I would want to know. As far as though I do think if I could tell myself something, which is slightly different, I would just, I think it's something I try and tell my kids, that again, it's what is the motivation behind your decision? Because I think there's really no wrong decisions, you know, there's no wrong decisions you make in the crossroads. It's just what is motivating them. Motivated by fear or should or expectation of others, you won't make good decisions. But if you're motivated by just passion and interest and curiosity and even a little bit of risk, that, you know, you'll go where you go.
Love it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jane. Such an interesting conversation. And yeah, I so admire your approach and kind of how you've made it work. And I hope that someone listening might take a bit of inspiration if they're thinking about how they design their own career and have that fit in with their life, not the other way around.
Yeah.
They take some ideas and some inspiration from it. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. I've had a great time. Good to talk to you.
Thank you.
Cheers.